In 1871, America was a wound, slowly healing from the raw surgery of its own civil war. The nation, stitched back together, was pushing west, bleeding ambition and hope onto the vast, untamed plains. This was the frontier, and the frontier was a promise. But it was also a vacuum, a place where civilization was a thin veneer, stretched taut over an abyss of isolation and lawlessness. And in the southeast corner of Kansas, in a new settlement called Labette County, this vacuum was about to be filled by a shadow. This was the territory of the Osage tribe, a land of rolling prairies and deep whispering creeks. It was beautiful, and it was empty. Through this emptiness ran the Osage Trail, a vital artery of migration, pulsing with the lives of homesteaders, soldiers, and speculators, all heading south to Texas or west to the promise of California. They traveled alone or in small family wagons, and they carried with them everything they owned. Their life savings in gold or greenbacks were often sewn into their clothes or hidden in boots. They were vulnerable, isolated, and miles from any semblance of law. And on the empty stretch of the Osage Trail, midway between the towns of Independence and Fair, a new structure appeared. It was a simple 16 by 24-foot wooden frame building. A crude sign swung in the ceaseless Kansas wind, offering groceries and lodging. This was the Wayside Inn, a place of rest for the weary traveler. It was run by a family known as the Benders. They were, by all accounts, an unsettling quartet. The patriarch was John Bender Sr., a man in his 60s, stocky and grim. He spoke with a thick, guttural German accent that was nearly incomprehensible. Most who met him described him as silent, brooding, with a palpable aura of menace. He was quick to anger and rarely spoke, preferring to stare. With him was his wife, Elvira. She was a gaunt, severe woman in her 50s who contemporaries called a she-devil. Like her husband, she spoke little English and was known for her unfriendliness, her piercing black eyes watching every traveler who entered their inn. She was believed to be the true source of the family's malice, a matriarch of pure, unadulterated avarice. Then there were the children, though children was a generous term. John Bender Jr. was in his mid-20s, tall and lanky, with the same unsettling social manner as his parents. He was prone to strange, inappropriate laughter and would often stand in the corner of the room just watching. He was seen as simple-minded, a follower, but with a latent cruelty that mirrored his father's. They were a family of ghosts, existing on the margins, seemingly repelling the very customers they sought to attract. But there was one reason travelers stopped. There was one reason they overlooked the silent father, the scowling mother, and the laughing fool in the corner. That reason was Kate. Kate Bender was 23 years old, and she was a star on the desolate prairie. She was vibrant, attractive, and charismatic. Where her family was silence and shadow, Kate was all light and sound. She was articulate, charming, and advertised herself as a healer, a clairvoyant, and a spiritualist. In an age obsessed with contacting the dead, an obsession fueled by the mass casualties of the Civil War, Kate was a sensation. She printed handbills advertising her supposed powers to contact spirits, heal ailments, and tell the future. She even claimed to lecture on the subject, a fiery, captivating speaker who could hold a room. She was the public face of the Bender Inn, the siren call that lured men off the lonely trail. Travelers, starved for conversation and comfort, were drawn to her. She would meet them at the door, invite them in for a hot meal, and offer them a seat at the table. She would listen to their stories, learn of their travels, and most importantly, discern what they carried. The inn itself was a single long room, bisected by a large, heavy canvas wagon cover. This curtain separated the family's living quarters in the back from the public grocery and dining area in the front. It was a flimsy, makeshift wall, but it was all the privacy the frontier afforded. For the traveler, the most welcoming spot was the seat of honor, a chair at the dinner table, its back placed squarely against this canvas divide. Kate would sit opposite, dazzling them, reading their palm, telling their fortune, making them feel seen. And as the traveler relaxed, leaning back, secure in this small bubble of warmth on the cold prairie, they would never see the curtain move behind them. They would never hear the footsteps. They would only feel the sudden, crushing impact of a hammer to the skull, delivered from the shadows. And then the silence of the prairie would rush in to reclaim its own, as another traveler's journey ended, right there, at the Devil's Inn.
The prairie kept its secrets. After the strike, the trapdoor in the floor would open, and the body would be dropped into the dark, unfinished cellar below. The blood was washed from the floor, the chair was reset, the plate was cleared. By morning, the Bender Inn was just a grocery store again, a quiet homestead on the vast, indifferent plains. The machine was efficient, brutal, and reset itself with the rising of the sun. But a machine so hungry cannot operate for long without being noticed. The trail was a place of transience, but it was not without its connections. People were expected, timetables were kept, and soon the void left by the missing began to take shape. In the winter of 1872, a man named George Launcher, along with his young daughter, left Independence, Kansas, heading for Iowa. They had sold their farm, and George was carrying the proceeds, a sum of nearly $2,000. They were last seen stopping at the Bender Inn. They were never seen again. Their wagon was later found abandoned by a creek miles away, its horses half-starved. Of George and his little girl, there was nothing. Not a footprint, not a trace. They had been swallowed by the prairie. Then there was Mr. Wetzel, a local farmer. He was a known quantity, a neighbor. He went to the town of Independence to sell goods and was returning with his payment. He too vanished on that stretch of the Osage Trail. His disappearance was different. It wasn't a stranger passing through. It was one of their own. The alarm was localized at first, a ripple of unease in the small, scattered community of homesteaders. The trail was already dangerous. It was rife with highwaymen and bandits. But this felt different. This wasn't robbery. It was erasure. Men weren't just being found shot on the trail, they were being disappeared from the face of the earth. The Osage Trail was becoming a graveyard, a Bermuda Triangle of the plains. A man named William Dietz bought a wagon load of goods in Independence and started for his homestead. He and his wagon, full of supplies, simply ceased to exist. Two more men who were known to be carrying substantial amounts of money were reported missing on the same route. Fear began to take root in Labette County. It was a cold, creeping dread. Travel between the small settlements slowed to a crawl. Men would no longer ride the trail alone, instead forming armed parties, their hands never far from their revolvers. The route was acquiring a dark reputation, a stigma that was choking the lifeblood of the county. The community, isolated and without any real law enforcement, knew they had to do something. A township meeting was called. It was held in the small, one-room Harmony Grove schoolhouse, a simple wooden building that represented the fragile seed of civilization on this wild land. On the day of the meeting, the settlers gathered, their faces etched with worry and suspicion. They were farmers, ranchers, and laborers, bound by a shared terror. And in a display of almost unimaginable audacity, John Bender Sr. and John Bender Jr. were in attendance. They sat in the schoolhouse, surrounded by the very people who were searching for the men they had murdered. They listened as man after man stood up, recounting stories of friends or relatives who had ridden onto the Osage Trail and never ridden out. Suspicion was a fever in that small room. It passed from man to man, from neighbor to neighbor. Fingers were pointed, theories were raised. Some blamed horse thieves, others, more ominously, blamed a coordinated gang of highwaymen. And it was here that the Benders didn't just hide, they attacked. John Bender Sr., in his thick, guttural German, rose and agreed. It was an outrage. He too was a settler, just trying to run his business. This lawlessness was bad for everyone. He forcefully, angrily suggested that the blame lay with the local Osage tribe. It was a classic and effective misdirection. Tensions between the settlers and the Osage were already high. It was an easy accusation, one that many in the room were all too willing to believe. The suspicion, which had been a fog, began to coalesce around a new, false target. But the true masterstroke came from Kate Bender. She too spoke, but she did not offer accusations, she offered help. She reminded the room of her gifts, her connection to the spirit world. She claimed that, for a price, she could use her clairvoyance to find the missing men. She could contact their spirits. She could see what they had seen. It was a chilling performance of calculated sympathy and predatory opportunism. She positioned herself not as a suspect, but as a potential savior, the only one with the tools to solve the mystery. The meeting eventually disbanded, the men frustrated and no closer to the truth. A committee was formed to investigate every homestead along the trail, a resolution that John Bender Sr. gruffly endorsed. The community left, their anger now directed toward the Osage. The Benders, father and son, returned to their inn, having sat in the heart of the investigation, looked their neighbors in the eye, and pointed the mob in the wrong direction. The shadow on the prairie was not just passive, it was cunning. It had a voice. And under the cover of this brilliant deflection, the trap was reset. The canvas curtain was drawn, and the family waited for the sound of the next wagon to come creaking down the trail.
The Benders' strategy of misdirection had been a brilliant success. The settlers of Labette County were angry, but they were looking in the wrong direction. The shadow of the Bender Inn had managed to deflect the light of inquiry. But in the spring of 1873, their luck and their time began to run out. The Prairie had swallowed many men. Now it was about to swallow the wrong man. His name was Dr. William York. He was not a wandering homesteader or a desperate speculator. He was a man of significant stature, a respected physician from Independence, Kansas, who had served as a surgeon in the Union Army. He was intelligent, well-known, and deeply connected. In March, Dr. York had traveled to Fort Scott, Kansas to visit his brother. His business concluded, he saddled his horse and began the return journey to Independence, a route that would take him directly down the Osage Trail, right past the Bender property. He was a man of routine and punctuality. When he failed to arrive in Independence as scheduled, the alarm was raised almost immediately. This was not a nameless, faceless traveler. This was Dr. York. The news of his disappearance traveled quickly, not just through the network of local settlers, but up the chain of command. It reached his brother in Fort Scott. This brother was not just any man either. He was Colonel Alexander York, a lawyer, a Civil War veteran, and a sitting state senator. He was a man of means, influence, and, most importantly, a cold, relentless determination. Colonel York did not wait. He did not hope. He acted. He assembled a posse of some 50 men, friends, former soldiers, and concerned citizens, and rode out from Fort Scott with a singular, unyielding purpose: to find his brother, or the men who had taken him. Colonel York was the antithesis of the Benders' previous victims. He was not isolated. He was not naive. He was a force of order and vengeance descending upon the lawless prairie. He arrived in Labette County like a storm front. He began his investigation with methodical precision.
He would not be distracted by rumors or hearsay. He and his posse began at the southern end of the trail and started a full-scale search, fanning out across the prairie, stopping at every cabin, every homestead, and every inn. They searched ravines, creeks, and thickets, and at every stop, Colonel York asked the same questions. "Have you seen my brother, Dr. William York, a man on a fine sorrel horse with a distinctive saddle?" His questions were not idle. They were interrogations. He looked every settler in the eye, gauging their reactions, searching for the slightest flicker of deception. The settlers, already on edge from the disappearances, were eager to help. And they all told him the same thing: check the Bender place. Suspicion, it seemed, had never fully strayed from the grim German family, despite their performance at the township meeting. On a cold, wind-swept afternoon, Colonel York and several of his men arrived at the Bender Inn. They dismounted, their hands on their holsters, and entered. The scene was just as others had described. The grim, silent John Sr., the gaunt, glowering Elvira, the simple, lanky John Jr. lurking in the corner, and of course, the charming Kate. She stepped forward immediately, her smile bright, offering the men hospitality, food, and a warm fire. Colonel York was not interested in hospitality. He was a lawyer and a senator, and he had seen charm weaponized before. He described his brother, Dr. York. He asked if they had seen him. The Benders' masks began to crack. John Jr. and Elvira claimed to understand no English, retreating into a wall of sullen silence. John Sr., in his broken, guttural fashion, grunted a negative. But it was Kate who took the lead. Yes, she said, she remembered the man. He had stopped at the inn. But, she explained, he had not stayed long. He had been threatened by Indians on the trail and was in a hurry. He'd bought some tobacco and ridden on. It was a plausible lie, one that cleverly played into the very misdirection her father had planted at the township meeting. But Colonel York wasn't buying it. He pressed her. He asked more questions. He noted the fine carpets and the organ in the corner, strange luxuries for a struggling prairie inn. He noted the tension in the room. He felt the eyes of the family on him, cold and hard. The atmosphere grew thick, charged with unsaid threats. Seeing her charm fail, Kate shifted tactics. She turned to her spiritualism. She told the colonel that for a price, her standard fee, she could use her clairvoyant powers to contact Dr. York's spirit. She could, she offered, even lead the colonel to his body. This was a catastrophic miscalculation. To a grieving, desperate man, this might have been a lifeline. To a hard-nosed, skeptical lawyer, this was a confession. York stared at her, his eyes like ice. He told her that if she could lead him to his brother's body, she better do it and do it for free, or she would be in more trouble than she could possibly imagine. The confrontation escalated. John Bender Sr., sensing the danger, flew into a rage. He burst forward, his thick accent hardening with fury, shouting in broken English that Colonel York and his men were insulting his daughter, that they were persecuting his family. He demanded they leave his home immediately. The posse members tensed, their hands moving to their weapons. For a moment, the small, canvas-divided room was a powder keg, seconds from exploding in a hail of gunfire. But Colonel York, a veteran of battles far worse, held his ground. He calmly told Bender that he was not finished with his questions. He stepped towards the enraged man. The tension was unbearable. Finally, Elvira and John Jr., perhaps seeing the suicidal folly of their patriarch's rage, grabbed the old man and pulled him back, placating him in German. Kate, her face pale, assured the colonel that her father was simply protective, that they meant no harm. The confrontation was over. Colonel York, his suspicions now cemented, knew he could get no more. He and his men left the inn, mounting their horses and riding away. But as he left, he told his posse that he was convinced the Benders knew more than they were saying. He was, he declared, going to return. The Benders watched them go, the dust settling on the trail. The net was tightening. They had been confronted by a force they could not charm, intimidate, or deflect. The winter snows began to melt, and as the hard, frozen ground of the prairie began to soften, the family knew that Colonel York would be back, and they knew what lay buried just a few yards from their door.
The confrontation with Colonel York had been the beginning of the end. The Benders knew the prairie would not keep its secrets for much longer. The spring thaw of 1873 was not just melting the snow, it was softening the graves. The family, trapped between the relentless winter and the approaching certainty of Colonel York's return, made their choice. They did not wait for the knock on the door. They vanished. Their escape was as silent and sudden as their arrival. One night they were there, a dark stain on the Osage Trail. The next morning, they were gone. The first to notice was a neighbor, Billy Toll, who was driving his cattle past the inn several days after the Benders had fled. He noted the unsettling silence. The inn, usually emitting at least a wisp of smoke or the sound of the Benders' barking dog, was dead still. The livestock, a few scrawny cows and a horse, were wandering in the yard, bawling with hunger. Toll, his suspicion piqued, approached the cabin. He found the door slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. He called out. No answer. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The scene was one of hasty but chilling departure. Food was still on the table, a half-eaten meal. Clothes were left behind, and the cabin was filled with a strange, sweet, and deeply sickening odor, a smell of decay, masked by disinfectant. Toll, terrified, fled the property and rode immediately to the township trustee. The alarm was raised. The Benders had absconded. The news spread like a prairie fire, and it reached Colonel Alexander York. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He gathered his posse, and this time he was not coming to ask questions. He was coming to get answers. Within hours, the Bender property was no longer an isolated inn. It was the center of a vortex, drawing in hundreds of people. Angry settlers, grim-faced vigilantes, curious neighbors, and Colonel York's organized search party all converged on the small, abandoned cabin. The scene was chaotic, a mix of grim investigation and morbid spectacle. Colonel York, along with several other men, took charge and entered the cabin. The stench was overwhelming. It was the smell of a slaughterhouse. They examined the room, noting the strange luxuries Kate had accumulated. Fine dresses, books, and the organ. They saw the canvas curtain hanging limply, but it was the floor that drew their attention. A large dark stain near the seat of honor had been scrubbed, but not clean. And beneath the bed they found it, a trapdoor, clumsily hidden. One of the men, bracing himself, took a crowbar and pried it open. The smell that rose from the opening was overpowering, a physical blow. Several men recoiled. One lit a lantern and held it down into the darkness. The light illuminated a small, rock-lined cellar about 6 feet deep. The floor of the pit was a single, massive, coagulated pool of clotted blood. It was inches thick. The air, trapped in the confined space, had putrefied. The cellar was empty, but it was the engine of the Benders' machine. This was the hole where the bodies were dropped, where they were likely stripped of their valuables and perhaps bled out like hogs. The trapdoor was slammed shut, and the men, their faces pale, stumbled back into the fresh air. They now understood the canvas curtain. They understood the seat of honor. They understood the mechanics of the horror. One man, searching the corners of the room, found the tools. Tucked away, as if forgotten in the haste, were 3 sledgehammers. 2 were large, 1 was smaller. All were stained, the wooden handles dark and sticky with blood and matted hair. The evidence was irrefutable.
but the bodies were not in the cellar. Where were the bodies? Colonel York's eyes and the eyes of the entire crowd turned to the only other place on the property that seemed disturbed: the apple orchard. It was a small, pathetic patch of land, little more than a dozen freshly planted saplings, sitting in a cultivated square of tilled earth. It was, the community now realized, the only part of the Bender farm that ever seemed to be tended. The ground was soft. A man took a long metal rod used for probing wells and plunged it into the earth near one of the saplings. It hit something soft. He pulled it out. The end was covered in a foul-smelling residue. Another man grabbed a shovel. He dug. 2 feet down, the shovel struck cloth. The men, now frantic, clawed at the dirt with their hands. They uncovered the body of a man, shoved into a shallow grave, his skull crushed in. It was Dr. William York. A wave of fury and horror rippled through the crowd. Colonel York, his face a mask of iron, identified his brother. The digging began in earnest. The orchard, which Kate had tended, was a graveyard. The men fanned out, probing the soft soil. Everywhere they pushed, they found a grave. They unearthed the body of George Launcher, and then, in a discovery that broke the hearts of even the hardest men present, they unearthed the body of his small daughter, buried with his murdered father. She had no visible wounds, and it was speculated she had been buried alive, thrown into the grave with her murdered father. The digging continued all day. With every discovery, a new wave of sickness and rage swept the crowd. They found Mr. Wetzel. They found William Dietz. One by one, the missing travelers were pulled from the shallow graves of the apple orchard's unholy ground. Some of them had their skulls caved in. Others, in a grim variance of the Bender's method, had their throats slit. One man was found with a rope around his neck, suggesting he had been strangled. By the time the sun began to set on the Osage Trail, 11 bodies had been pulled from the orchard's unholy ground. And there was one more. Another body, that of a man, was discovered dumped in the property's well, polluting the water. The total was 12. 12 people, including a small child, murdered and plundered, their bodies left to rot in the Kansas soil. The Bender Inn, once a simple landmark, was now a monument to an evil so profound, so mundane in its execution, that it defied comprehension. The frontier promise had become an American nightmare.
The discovery in the apple orchard ripped the veil off the frontier. The news of the Bender Inn, which the press quickly dubbed Hell's Half-Acre and the Garden of Death, spread across the United States with sickening speed. Newspapers from New York to San Francisco ran lurid, sensationalized accounts of the blood pit, the hammers, and the family of human ghouls. The cabin itself became a grotesque tourist attraction. Souvenir hunters descended on the property, tearing the canvas curtain to shreds, chipping pieces off the blood-soaked floorboards, and even digging in the orchard themselves, hoping to find a bone or a tooth. The Bender Inn, a place of carefully constructed anonymity, was now the most famous and infamous spot in America. But its proprietors were gone. As the nation reeled in horror, the largest manhunt in the history of the American West began. The governor of Kansas issued a state reward of $2,000, a fortune at the time, for the apprehension of the 4 murderers. Detective agencies, including the legendary Pinkertons, were rumored to be on the case. Telegrams with their descriptions crackled across the wires, and wanted posters bearing crude sketches of the family were nailed to the walls of train stations and post offices from Missouri to Texas. The hunt was on. But the Benders had a head start, and they were masters of deception. Investigators, led by Colonel York, managed to pick up their trail. They found the Benders' wagon, the one that had carried them away from the inn, abandoned in a thicket near the town of Thayer, about 12 miles north of the homestead. The wagon and a few starved ponies
were the last concrete, undisputed traces of the Bender family on Earth. From that spot, the trail went cold. They had vanished, as if the prairie had opened a second time and swallowed them, just as it had their victims. This vanishing, this perfect, complete erasure, is the final agonizing act of the Bender saga. It's the void that has haunted investigators and historians for over a century. In the absence of facts, legend and theory rushed in to fill the vacuum. The first and most popular local theory is one of frontier justice. This story, whispered in taverns and around campfires, claims the Benders were caught. According to this legend, a posse, perhaps led by the grieving and furious Colonel York himself, or by the families of the other victims, finally tracked the Benders down. But they didn't arrest them. They didn't bring them back for a judge and a jury. The crimes were too monstrous, the evidence too plain, the rage of the community too absolute. In this version, the posse held its own trial on the spot. The Benders were executed, some say shot, others say lynched from a tree, and their bodies were dumped, perhaps in the deep, fast-flowing Verdigris River, where they would be washed away, unmourned and unburied. This theory provides a satisfying, cathartic end to the story. It delivers the justice the law failed to, but it is, in all likelihood, a comforting fiction. There is no evidence, and men like Colonel York, a state senator and a man of the law, were unlikely to participate in such an act. The second and more chilling theory is that they simply got away. They were smart, they were organized, they had thousands of dollars in stolen cash. At Thayer, where the wagon was found, they would have reached the Leavenworth, Lawrence, and Galveston Railroad. It's believed they split up, purchasing tickets in different directions, forever severing their connection. John Sr. and Elvira, old and identifiable, may have sought anonymity in a crowded city or a different lawless territory. But the real focus was on John Jr. and Kate. They were young, and their bond itself was a source of dark speculation. Many investigators came to believe they were not brother and sister at all, but husband and wife, a murderous couple masquerading as siblings. This theory holds that they fled south, perhaps to the borderlands of Texas or New Mexico, where they could reinvent themselves entirely. This possibility is the true horror of the Bender story, that they simply washed the blood off, changed their names, and lived out their lives, perhaps dying of old age, surrounded by new neighbors who never knew the monsters living beside them. This theory also fed a different kind of legend. For the next 50 years, Kate Bender was the ghost of the American West. She was spotted everywhere. Any woman with red hair and a passing interest in spiritualism was a target of suspicion. Arrests were made in distant states, only for the women to be cleared. The legend of Kate Bender, the beautiful, charismatic, spiritualist serial killer, had far outlived the woman herself. She became the archetype of the female predator, a dark siren of the plains. And what of the family itself? This too unravels under scrutiny. It's possible none of them were related. They may have been a disparate group of criminals who came together for the sole purpose of this murderous enterprise. The brutish Pa, the grim Ma, and the two younger, more presentable children to act as lures. They were a performance, a facade of civilization designed to hide a machine of pure, cold, financial-driven slaughter. The Bender family was never found, not one of them. The reward was never claimed. No one was ever arrested, tried, or convicted for the 12 murders on the Osage Trail. They remain to this day America's first and most successful family of serial killers. They are the ultimate embodiment of the frontier's dark side, a place not just of hope and rebirth, but of terrifying, violent anonymity. A place where you could build a home, commit unspeakable evil, and then, like a ghost, simply dissolve into the dust.
Join the discussion in the comments below. If you want to join the next investigation, subscribe to Storysketchai and hit the notification bell so you are here when we unseal it.